Canadian churches are burning, literally, and the motive behind it is far deeper and darker than you think. Since 2021, over 100 Christian worship centers have either been burnt or vandalized, a disturbing trend that highlights the growing resentment towards Christians across the country.
Pissed at the church. I got no respect for the church. That cross has done so much damage. I mean, caused so much grief and killed so many people, not just Native people.
But why exactly are Christians hated in Canada, and who is behind the church burnings? Politicians? Natives? The woke? Or is it the influx of new immigrant with anti-Christian agenda who are systematically taking over Canada? And why is the media and the government hiding this? In the thick of the night on June 22, 2021, residents in the British Columbia neighborhood noticed something awkward in the skies. A large plume of smoke rising from St. Gregory's Catholic Church. The worship center, which was established in 1910, had caught fire and was burning furiously. This inferno completely ravaged the centuries-old structure, leaving behind nothing but pieces of scrap metal and a cement slab that once stood as the focal point of the auditorium. But as officials began to investigate the fire, they discovered something shocking. The Sacred Heart Mission Church in Penticton, just 1 hour's drive from St. Gregory, had also gone up in flames. Surely, this has to be some kind of coincidence. Or maybe not, because just 48 hours later, St. Anne's Catholic Church and Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church were both burnt to the ground. At this point, it became clear that there was more to this issue than coincidence, especially because the affected churches had something in common. They were all Catholic churches built on Indigenous land. This expectedly raised concerns among the Christian community. But apparently, the worst was yet to come. Over the next couple of weeks, reports of more burnt churches started to filter in as arsonists went on a rampage. This time, it wasn't just Catholic churches alone. Anglican, evangelical, and Protestant denomination worship centers were targeted as well. At the time of making this video, a total of 112 churches have been affected as shown in this map. That in itself is worrying. But here's the crazy part. Of all the incidents, only 12 people have been arrested so far. This includes August Tanner Marcel and Raymond Ahayasa Cardinal, who was only 19 when he allegedly committed the crime in 2022. Ironically, neither of them have been convicted at the time of making this video. In fact, in the case of Marcel, he was acquitted of arson in May 2024. Since then, the police have continued to investigate the issue, but despite their best efforts, very little progress has been made so far. While security operatives are doing their best to unravel the mystery around this issue, it appears as though there's a hidden agenda from the media to sweep it under the carpet. Reports of the incessant church burnings are almost never reported by the mainstream media. And even when they make the news, they're given very little attention. What makes it even worse is that if this issue were to be about mosques or in Hindu temples, there probably would have been a public outcry. The media would have run several feature stories around it, and more importantly, politicians would have made more efforts to reassure the victims and douse the tension. Unfortunately, the opposite is what we are witnessing today. In fact, despite the wave of arson and terror that is being unleashed on churches, many top political figures in the country have continued to fan the fire. This includes former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who described the attacks on Catholic churches as fully understandable. Such reckless comments represent a new low for the country. It's absolutely disheartening that a first-world nation like Canada, renowned for its tolerance, inclusivity, and religious liberty, is slowly becoming inhabitable for Christians. But how exactly did we get here? It all began in May 2021, when members of the TKMLUP's Shawepam tribe claimed to have discovered unmarked graves at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School using ground-penetrating radar. At first, it started as a rumor, but things quickly got serious. Especially when one of the tribe's top chief, Rosen Casimir, quote-unquote, confirmed the allegations, claiming that the graves belonged to undocumented Indigenous children, some as young as 3. Trust the liberal media to do its thing. The story spread like wildfire, and over the next year, around 2,000 unmarked graves were allegedly discovered at former residential schools. The backlash was enormous. So much that Pope Francis issued a public apology on behalf of the Catholic Church for its role in the residential school system.
Pido perdón.
Sorry for the ways in which, regrettably, many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppress the indigenous peoples. I am sorry. I ask forgiveness.
Unfortunately, his apology didn't help matters, and by mid-2021, the tension officially escalated into a wave of arson attacks on churches. It's absolutely shocking that this evil campaign against Christian worship centers has been allowed to thrive for so long. But what's even more disappointing is that the claims of unmarked graves that led to this chaos were not even confirmed. Contrary to Casimir's claims that the bodies were confirmed, multiple sources, including the New York Post, say that proper investigation has not been done on the issue. And despite the government allocating $78.3 million Canadian dollars to locate and commemorate children found at Kamloops and other reported grave sites, not a single evidence has been presented other than a contentious ground-penetrating radar experiment that has not been confirmed. Yet, churches across the country continue to go up in flames, and nobody is willing to set the record straight. Despite knowing that their allegations are unconfirmed, the Tk'emlúps tribe refused to retract their statements. Instead, they've continued to emphasize their false claims in public, further heightening the hostility against churches. For instance, Philip Horgan, the Catholic Civil Rights League's president and general counsel, confirmed that at least 3 excavations were carried out with the knowledge of the Canadian police, and no bodies were found. Chief Derek Nepanak of the Anishinaabe Nation was also part of the process, but was disappointed that no bodies were found. So, rather than acknowledging the results, he urged people to continue seeking the truth. Horgan also added that the 2021 excavation at the former Shubenacadie Residential School and the 34 excavations on the Charles Camsell Hospital grounds in Alberta produced 0 bodies. And for all the noise in the media, neither the Canadian government nor the Tk'emlúps First Nation have bothered to excavate the alleged unmarked grave sites near Kamloops Indian Residential School or any of the alleged sites. Worse of all, those who attempt to challenge the allegations of genocide and unmarked graves are being criticized and labeled as denialists by Kimberly Murray, the independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves and burial sites associated with Indian residential schools. But it doesn't end there. Murray also recommended that civil and criminal sanctions should be imposed on anyone who dares to challenge the claims of unmarked grave sites. Remarkably, this proposal has received the backing of top political figures and ideological groups across the country. This suggests that the wave of violence against churches may actually be far deeper and darker than we think. More importantly, it opens a whole new set of questions, particularly about the identity of those behind the attacks. In recent months, there's been a lot of speculation that liberals, radicals, and Islamic terrorists are behind the arson attacks on churches. But we cannot run with such narratives. Speculation does not aid justice, not for the alleged victims, and certainly not for the worship centers that have been desecrated and burnt. In light of this, it is imperative to publicly clarify the status of the unmarked grave allegations. This should be done as quickly as possible, and the same urgency must be applied in providing better security for worship centers. Lastly, authorities must do everything possible to bring everyone involved in the burning and vandalization of churches to justice. Until these resolutions are implemented, the Canadian Christian community will continue to suffer, and the truth behind these attacks will remain obscured.